Welcome back to the Messy City Podcast. This is Kevin Klinkenberg. Today I've got a special guest, Clay Chapman, joining us from Oklahoma. Clay is somebody I've known a little while, and I always say he's the guy at whatever conference or anything that he's presenting at. He's the one that everybody wants to talk to the most, because these incredible brick buildings that he's building. Clay, welcome. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you for having me, Kevin. It's a joy to be here with you.
Well, I appreciate it. I think for anybody that doesn't know Clay, so your company is Hope for Architecture. Is that the moniker you're still using?
Well, Hope for Architecture is more the building initiative that we banner under, and my business name, I operate as Artisan Trade, so that's pretty inconsequential.
Okay. Because I also know that, like, on some social media, you use a moniker of 1,000-Year House.
Yeah, that's a little more specific to me. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I wouldn't want to call myself Hope for Architecture. I might call you Hope for Architecture, Kevin.
I don't know about that, but I do. But there still is like a website and some other stuff that says Hope for Architecture, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay, and that features some of the work that you all have done over the years. Yeah.
Right.
So, Clay, I'm really interested to do this because one of the things I really don't know, we've talked about your buildings quite a bit, and we'll get into that. But one of the things I don't really know much about is how you came into doing this kind of work. Wonder if you would talk a little bit about what led you into this world of designing and building the houses that you're doing today. Did you come at this from a design background originally, or from a trades background, or something else entirely?
Well, there's not a short answer, but my background's in fine arts, and I was going to school studying fine arts, and it was pretty expensive, and just kind of out of necessity, I started a small business while I was going to school, during my summer break, building like hay barns and run-in sheds for equestrian related stuff, And it was just rough sawn yellow pine. I'm from the South, grew up in Georgia, and we had a lot of horses around us. So, but anyway, I just started building these sort of very common ag buildings, old school, rough sawn, and that was the way I got myself through school. And yeah, I would just come home summer after summer and put a little ad in our local paper, and it was able to. I tried hanging steel for a summer. If I saved every penny, I wasn't going to have enough to go to school, and this was sort of a desperate attempt. The first time I did it, I called the local newspaper, and for like a 3x4 ad, it was going to cost $35, and I was like, just really weighing it, whether or not I wanted to risk this $35. And I'm glad I did. I got my first contract job from that, and we were off and running.
Okay, so then you started doing that during college, and then with pursuing a fine arts degree. What came of all that after the end of college?
Well, I'm midway through college, realizing I'm going to be a builder. It was very clear to me that I was going to be a builder, even though I was studying fine arts. But I wanted to get my degree and finish what I'd started there. So I switched majors to art ed, K through 12, and got a teaching certificate with the plan to, get the degree and have something to fall back on, kind of a safety net, But I've never used it yet. I just started building straight out of college and kind of traveled Southeast for a number of years building carpentry-based buildings. And that became more and more involved. With each project, I got more intricate until, eventually we're building European-style horse stables almost, but the horses were really hard on these carpentry-based buildings. And I would come back, and this is very interesting. I would come back a couple of years after having, really poured my soul into building this wooden building for a horse. And it was as if 20 years had passed, because the horse, we got this 1,200-pound animal that's sweating and kicking and
Uh-huh.
biting. And it's a horse is like a time machine for a building, right? And it just really, it really impressed upon me what the fate of my buildings were. Regardless of a horse, it's going to look like this fairly soon.
Mhm.
So it made me very, very sensitive to time and attrition in buildings. And I got to the point where I was like, I really said, I'm just going to build it out of solid brick. I'd never heard of structural masonry, Kevin. I had no idea this was the paragon medium of architecture, but as far as I was concerned, I was discovering a way to build. But I really landed on this as an attempt to show the horses, all right, bite on this, kick this. Like, so,
Yeah, so was there a first structure then that was like a stables that you tried, doing out of brick then was
yeah, in West Tennessee, a little town called Henderson, Tennessee, just south of Jackson, kind of in between Nashville and Memphis. I built the Strickland stable, and it was our first attempt at it. I didn't know how to lay brick, so I had hired a local mason, a guy named Jimmy Phillips, he was in his 70s at that point, so he was old enough. And this was like 98, 97, 98 when I hired him,
Mhm,
and 70 something years old, still laying brick, and just kind of an old Southern gentleman, who could remember when building with solid brick was a thing, before the advent of the concrete block really took off after World War II. So this pre-war style of masonry he was familiar with, and I think he was kind of excited to do it, because they just didn't do it anymore.
mhm,
And so I hired them to do it, and I kind of picked up a trowel and started working with them, and I realized pretty quickly that this was just a sculpting medium, because I studied oil painting and sculpting in bronze and things of that nature. Uh, so I really began to look at these brick as pixels, and I felt like they were really underutilized. Like you could do so much with brick that just wasn't being done. A lot of curvilinear stuff. It was just a very untapped medium as
mhm.
far as I was concerned.
So, was it you then who had the idea to kinda talk to him and say, "Let's do structural masonry," and, as opposed to the sort of CMU and brick, approach, or did he was he already doing that and wanted to, pursue that with you?
No, I had come to him. So if I back up a little bit, before I went the structural masonry route, I had done a timber building with a veneer skin on the timber,
Okay.
and it was modeled after some existing buildings in my hometown that uh, there was a monastery there, and some monks had built these dairy barns years and years earlier. And I was inspired by those buildings, and this was the way that they had built those. But then I realized I really needed to eliminate the the horse's access to wood,
Yeah.
and I thought, well, my goodness, why not just build it out of solid brick and just put this to rest.
Mhm,
And so I came to Jimmy Phillips, the old tenured mason, that I was uh, relying on for guidance in this, because he could still remember doing it. And he was like, sure, yeah, we can do that. So that's how we got started with it.
and he had enough, memory of doing it that way that he was able to kinda work through it, and then was he sort of like the initial teacher then for you of how to
Oh,
work this way?
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah.
yeah, and
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 and and I should say that there's not a lot to remember. Veneer brick is actually more difficult, more tedious to do than structural masonry. Structural masonry is very forgiving. When I had a group of guild members come out and lay brick with us here in Carlton Landing, you remember that project a while back,
Mhm,
And one of the things that Nathan said, his greatest takeaway from this was how often I referred to the work being forgiving,
Hmm.
and that's because there's just so much mass there, you know, and you're dealing with a 12-inch wall, and there's just so much material there. It's things don't have to be perfect, and it can like while veneer a lot of times can't afford not to be perfect, if you know what
Yeah.
I mean, from a structural standpoint.
So maybe I should take a step back, and for anybody who's not as familiar, if you wanted to describe the difference between structural masonry and veneer for a layperson, how would you describe that?
So a veneer is what you normally see right now in terms of brick construction. When you see brick being laid today, 99.999% of the time, it's going to be a veneer. And that means there's a wooden frame that's a substrate to the veneer. And the veneer is just a skin. You're skinning the building with brick, and it is imitating a solid brick building. Solid brick buildings came first, and then they came up with a way to have the illusion of a solid brick building without having the substance.
Right. And the reason the trades and the design world went more towards veneer versus structural masonry is what in your opinion or your experience?
Well, the reason that they went that direction, it happened in a time when our threshold for comfort was greater than it is now. You know, so it was much less expensive. Hold on. Um, it was it was cheaper to build that way then, but
Hmm.
that was before we attacked on so many band-aids to the frame construction. Um, Nowadays uh, everything is sort of based on that 16-inch center 4x8 sheet product,
Right.
and as our threshold for comfort became harder to satisfy, we kept uh, adding on to that building process all of these ways to improve it. And the way that I look at that, we were kind of painting ourselves into a corner, but all the infrastructure is in place for building this way. And so by the time for instance, uh, a, a conventional envelope wall has 8 to 10 steps involved in it now. And when I build with a triple wide brick wall, it's one step, and we walk away from that cubic foot of brick and don't come back to it. It's done.
Hmm.
And that's what makes it cost effective now.
Hmm. Yeah. Because
Does that answer your question?
yeah, I mean, I think so. So like what a lot of people probably don't understand is like maybe the wood frame houses somebody might think of that were built in the 1950s, which went up super quick and were easy. The wood frame houses we build today are not the same. Um,
Exactly. There's a lot more involved.
yeah,
You've got the much more elaborate installation and house wraps and all of this stuff that you didn't have back then. That it was very much less. It was a lot less expensive to build a veneer
yeah,
then than it is now.
yeah. And some of that is just the way construction techniques evolved. Some of it is regulatory, meeting energy codes and other construction codes. Like if you're in a seismic zone or something like that, there's just a lot of different requirements now than there would have been in that era. So that's really interesting. So, in a sense, then it's like there was this idea that going to the brick veneer process solved a problem that got people brick buildings cheaper, but built around a wood frame. But over time, the construction world has evolved such that it's not a simple thing anymore. It's not necessarily cheap. And what you're looking at is a real simplification of the process by just having the structural masonry.
Exactly. That's exactly the case.
Okay. All right. So then for basic terminology, then for others too, talk about what is a triple wythe wall?
Okay, so one brick is 1 brick wide is a width. So there's some sort of relationship between wide and width.
Mhm.
I'm not sure what the etymological background is on that. But so for each width, that is a brick thick. So triple width would mean 3 brick thick,
Mhm.
which is roughly with the collar joints, which is a little space between each of those widths. You thinking a brick in 4-inch increments.
Uh-huh.
So, but even that depends. So with an industry brick, you're looking at 11 and a half to 12 inches. If I'm using a salvaged brick, right now we're building 13-inch walls because the modular brick, which is your standard brick, there's all kinds of brick shapes. The modular brick is just the standard brick shape
Mhm.
that we're most used to. Um, with the salvage brick, they're a little bit bigger. Industry brick, a little bit smaller, so
Huh.
that affects the width of that wall.
Okay. So what is there such a practice as a double width wall? Why 3 instead of 2?
Yeah, actually, we're building a double width wall right now for a like a carport utility room,
Mhm.
and this room will provide some stability to the overall canopy of the carport, in addition to obvious space it provides. Um, but people have lived in double width walls. The advantage to the triple width or even the quad width is the added thermal mass, and the added structure.
Mhm.
If you get above the Mason Dixon line, when in colder climes, then you're going to want to switch to a quad width,
Hmm.
which
And
will.
what
But in upstate New York, you'll find triple wide buildings. You'll find triple wide buildings all over the place in Canada and Montana, all over the place.
yeah.
So,
Yeah. And we're even here in Kansas City, we've got obviously a ton of historic brick structures. I would imagine most of those are in the realm of like a triple width wall then, especially a lot of the older kind of warehouse, industrial, or office buildings that were
mhm,
built in that era. Um,
right.
so, okay, so that's good. That's good background to kind of set the table. And one of the things that I've seen is that the homes that you've had the opportunity to build. Obviously, people look at them and they're gorgeous. I think there's something that we all react to with brick as a natural material, uh, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about just the visual side of things. We can get more. I want to talk about some of the construction details too, because I think that's fascinating to get into with how we deal with modern construction these days. But just talk a little bit about the aesthetic reaction that you and others have had when they experience your buildings.
Well, they're definitely not indifferent to it, right?
Yeah.
And so much of what's being built today, it's just I think it's better to be bad than it is to be apathetic. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like for a building to evoke nothing in someone feels worse to me than a building that evokes a negative. At least that gives you some direction, you
Yeah.
know. But I would say that there's just always that second glance. There's always that strong emotional reaction to what we're doing, and that has a lot to do with just how real it is. That it's not pretending to be something that it's not.
Hmm.
And we live in a time where there's just such a vacuum for authenticity, right? And uh, we're providing that in a very honest way.
Hmm.
That's I think it has a lot to do with how it's kind of cosmetically unaware in in, in some respects.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Do you? I mean, how often do you encounter visitors or buyers that just look at your houses and are blown away, or just find themselves kind of staring at like this almost feels it's such a funny thing because this would have been entirely natural 150 years ago, but they look at it now like it's almost dropped out of the sky as some sort of alien construction.
yeah, and that does happen pretty frequently, where someone will come in and they just can't believe we're doing it. They can't believe their eyes,
Yeah.
that someone is building this way. Um, I've passed the point of where I try to sell what we do any longer. Either if I have to talk you into it, I'm not sure you're going to understand it, but and the people that tend to get it are all in, and that's
Yeah.
our market. And they're yeah. I used to evangelize for it pretty strongly, but now we just do the work and let the work do the talking, and through the apprenticeship program and our internship programs, teaching other people how to do it. That's the way we're really trying to, make a difference with this way of building.
Yeah. So when you go back and think about that first stables that you built out of brick, I'm curious. Like, first of all, have you visited and seen how it's holding up, and also what do you do differently? What are you doing differently from a construction standpoint than that first effort in brick construction?
Oh, quite a few things. It's been a journey in determining best practices. At first, the obvious challenge is how do we create this masonry envelope in a time effective, cost effective way that can be scaled, and that is a big part of it. But the thing that is maybe equally as challenging is how do we integrate convention to that masonry substrate once it's established?
Hmm.
Because you want to get back to convention as soon as you can, because you're trying to create a building with multi-century life cycle that's also affordable, right?
Hmm.
And the convention has already sorted out the economy of all this. So whenever I can walk into a Lowe's or a Home Depot, and I'm hot wiring that 16-inch on center interface, right? They've already sorted out the cost there. That's the way that we're able to make it affordable. Is because think of it like this, Kevin. You're just taking a production home building and inserting into that model a structural masonry envelope.
Hmm.
So that's a super simplified, maybe a little reductive way to look at what we're doing.
Hmm. Yeah. uh, and, uh, and obviously still having more conventional, like a roof structure with with wood and
Yeah, that's
whatever
all
you might
stick.
use. Yeah.
That's all stick framed.
Yep.
You'll see on some of the really high end stuff that will do some timber framing and things of that nature. But that's not a way to be very. You can't scale that very well.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. So I think one of the questions that probably a lot of people would have is, if you've been in an older, like a 19th century brick building, or even earlier, that they love the beauty of it, but they feel like, oh God, those buildings are so drafty, they're cold, they're uncomfortable. How do you, how does the comfort situation, how is that similar or different with the newly constructed houses that you're doing?
So that's
Um,
accurate. They are that. But but again, we're I don't know of any other building model that is operating under the format of taking the best of the old and the best of the new and fusing those together.
mhm,
Normally that pendulum swing. If someone is going to be period and building the way that we're building with brick, they're going to be out there in a kilt and using no, not using power tools, and you just go too far with it. So we're not purist, and that's an important point. We're only pure in the sense that we want to create a vernacular that has um, extremely long lasting life cycle, multi-century life cycle. And we're not speculating about that. We know with what's standing today along the historic timeline that these buildings will last a very long time. We know that. And I think it's our responsibility to build in such a way that things don't have to be rebuilt so soon.
mhm.
So, yeah.
So let's talk more about that, because I think, as I've heard you talk many times and write over the years, that long term, the 1,000-year house idea that you throw out there, and that long term approach is really key. I mean, it's central to kind of how you think about these buildings. It's not just doing something because it's you're trying to revive an old tradition, but there's a deeper approach about building things that are long lasting, and can address other issues we wrestle with in modern society.
Yeah, well, I've got something to say, but let me preface it with we're not doing anything to look old,
Yeah.
you know. And I think most people are. I think a lot of people don't understand why they like the buildings that they like that are traditional and older. They think that they like it because it's old. What they really are drawn to that is that it was built in such a way that it could one day be old. And
Mm,
those are very different things,
hmm.
you know. But if you don't understand why you feel that way, then that'll lead you to believe, well, I can just make it look old, and that will satisfy this. I can replicate this feeling that I've gotten from this old building by just making a new building look old. They don't understand, well, why it's not the same, you know. But basically, the motivator for us is, uh, sometimes between uh, our grandchildren and their grandchildren, almost everything is going to have to be rebuilt. And when that time comes, the world's going to be a much more complicated place with many more people, uh, and a lot fewer resources. Uh, so I think that there is a moral obligation, to build better and not treat building as a money making emergency in one of the most affluent nations the planet's ever seen. You know,
Hmm.
why are we so um, uh, there's just a sense of alarm to make money, and I'm not going to triage the way I build things for an emergency that I think isn't real.
Hmm.
Um, it just the market prescribes what we should do, and we do what the market tells us to do, and I'm just uh, not convinced.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's interesting. I mean, I like the way you preface that by thinking about things that uh, you might hope would look old at a future date. And obviously, if you build these and build them well, the way you're doing them, it really would be something that are 4 or 5 generations down the line people could enjoy. And I think that's a fascinating thing to think about. That there's so much, like you said, so much of architecture and building that we're almost surprised if it exists 40 years from now.
Oh yeah, yeah, and again, people they just don't understand that. That's why it's so important for us to know why we feel the way that we do about things, and to do deep dives on that, and to really grapple with where our feelings come from. Because sure, people, there is an element of being drawn to something that is has a long history, but that's because uh, there's a residue, an actual residue that can't be counterfeited, of lives that have touched that thing,
Mhm.
whether it's a tool or a house or furniture or whatever. There's a very real. It has its own history. We're drawn to that. But foremost, and I've said it. I just think that this is the takeaway is people don't like things because they're old. They are drawn to them because they were made in such a way that they could one day be old.
Mhm. Yeah. How much of an impact do you think it is that you look at something like a brick building? How much of the emotional response is you look at that and you say, you know what? I know human hands put that together. Uh, and obviously, a stick frame house is built by humans just as well, and uh, but it doesn't evoke the same response. When you look at maybe a typical sort of modern suburban house or any other house, newly built house, it feels a little bit more like an industrial product. Whereas you look at like a brick building and you say, yeah, I can understand that humans actually helped build that. I can see where that could have happened.
Yeah. Um, a brick is unique in that regard, in that If you take a human hand and create a cuboidal shape over the hand, it, that's the geometry of a brick, you know. So the brick is made for a hand before it's made for a wall, right?
Hmm.
It's made so that the hand can lift it and turn it into a wall. So for every brick that you see the work of hands. You know, they represent a hand. Um, and this is where I think we really lack some language, Kevin. We're getting into some territory where you want to say we want to talk about a live architecture
Hmm.
and talk about a building that the spirit of a building or the soulfulness of a building, and it just all feels so inadequate to what to the reality that you and I know is there. You know, so we're kind of fumbling around with the language, trying to communicate what we feel like very much needs to be communicated, and I'm constantly working on that, trying to evolve how to put it into words.
Hmm.
But did you see the recent thing that Paul Crabtree uh, put on the
Yeah.
Guild with the 3D printing? And
Yeah. Yeah.
I
It's
think
always, it always seems like there's a new technological fix or at least a concept that somebody's putting out there that's going to revolutionize masonry construction or house construction in some fashion.
it's fascinating. It's very interesting. I'll be curious to see where it goes. You know, I'm not going to split hairs too much over whether hands did it, although I think it's very important. If it will still last a very long time, and if it has multi-century life cycle and it's cost effective, then I think that's a move in the right direction when we're in this world of disposable building and just throw away obsolete everything,
Right.
built-in
Right.
obsolescence. Uh, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the future of that is.
Yeah. Do you, how much of that speaks to you is really about that notion of uh, not wasting things. And it kind of feels like there's a part of that. You're kind of either a person who cares about not wasting things and having everything be well used, or you're somebody who's like, whatever, So we're building something today, we tear it down. 30 years from now, who cares? What's the difference?
Yeah, yeah. People can joke, "Well, I'll be gone. I'll be long gone by then," and
Yeah.
that's a really common way to look at uh, the disposable nature of the way that we're doing things. And I'm always surprised that that's that's considered humorous, or you know what I mean, or
Hmm.
that we're comfortable just saying that we don't care about the world we leave future people.
Yeah.
That just because they don't have a vote yet and because they don't exist yet, we can get away with saying
Yeah.
and doing so much to them,
Yeah.
because
I mean,
that's what we're doing things to people that don't exist yet. We're making, we're making choices that they're going to have to live with.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I mean, a lot of people have written about the notion of like how disposable our architecture and our cities has become, with kind of mass industrialization. I think about that sometimes because I've got little kids, and if you got little kids today, it's like you're buried in a constant, ocean of just crap,
Right, right.
plastic this, plastic that, and it's just a never ending array of cheap toys and everything else. Because that's just, that's the nature of the time we're in now. That's even pretty different than say 30 or 40 years ago. Uh, and it sort of drives me personally a little crazy that it's like I'm constantly picking things up and just throwing them away. Uh,
Sure.
and uh,
It's the
it,
easiest thing to do, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's almost programmatically not set up to do otherwise,
right,
you
right.
know?
And we certainly have a similar attitude. It's not that we never had, build things and tear them down. Historically, we did a lot of that, but there was a notion that once you once you hit a certain point in a development cycle, you were building a building to really last a very long period of time, and it was a source of pride that this would be a building that would be around for a couple hundred years or more.
Mm, mm.
Uh, so tell
Yeah,
me about at some point you started building houses for people. What was the first house you actually built for somebody?
so that was in Rome, Georgia. It was the Pierce Lee House, and yeah, these folks they'd called me a few years earlier to build a barn, and they'd been looking for someone, but I told them I wasn't able to. I was pretty tied up with other work. So they found someone to do that, but then they'd been looking for a builder to build their house for a couple of years and hadn't been able to find a builder that felt right. And they just kind of reached out to me on a whim. And I said, well, I've never built a house before, but you can come out and look at the work that we're doing now. And they came out to look at a stable that I was working on. It was a 6-hour drive for them. So they
Hmm.
were pretty serious and they invested in it. And they came out to see the building and they got out of the car and cried. So you were asking earlier about
Hmm.
what kind of, emotions that get evoked because they just felt like right away when they saw that building that they'd found their builder, you know, and now, that's a nice moment. It's good to have that kind of effect, you know, to put so much effort into your work, and it really is a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and then for it to pay off.
Yeah.
Those are the moments where you realize you've hit the mark,
Yeah. How did you
But
I'm sorry, go ahead.
but so once I had built that first house, that sort of launched me into the house building business, and I was building really high end structural masonry and timber frame structures for the one percenter market,
Mhm.
for a number of years, and then I got married and had children and started experiencing just what you were describing. And you wake up one day and you say, well, what am I doing to make their world better, because the situation seems dire, you know and I'm a builder, so the only solution I can provide will have to have something to do with building, right? And this about the same time I'd been bringing home leftover brick from various job sites and just kind of hoarding a number of brick, and I decided to build this little garden, uh, shed, studio, chapel,
Mhm.
you know, in my backyard. And I built this didn't even have any plans. I just started building. And when I was done with it, I stepped away from that little building. I looked at it and I thought, well, how many of my friends wouldn't want to live in a house built just like this? And it was, keep in mind, this was very distilled compared to what I was normally, very simple design, and that was when the light bulb really went off. If I can figure out a way to build this way that that I can afford,
Mhm.
because at that point I was building stuff that I could never afford,
Mhm.
you know. So that was when the inspiration really hit, and within less than a year, we were, you know, laying the first brick on our field test in Columbus, Georgia, which led to this wonderful 3-week long thermal mass study with Clemson University, um, and eventually led to us moving out to Carlton Landing.
Yeah, so how did you ultimately get hooked up with the crazy people in the new urbanist world and the urban guild, that we all know?
You can blame Scott Doyen for that,
I'll be
and
happy to.
Steve Muzan, and Nathan Norris, Andreas. Um, but Scott and I, we both lived in the city of Decatur,
Okay.
just outside of Atlanta.
Yeah.
We were going to the same church, and I would see Scott around town in a coffee shop or something in the mornings, and he had his newspaper ritual, and he and I. Uh, we just struck up a conversation one day, and he was interested in what I was doing, and we became friends. And and then very slowly, Scott started, pushing little bits of information about new urbanists towards me, and I was fairly skeptical at first, but he was fairly persistent with it, and there was almost some coaching going on a little
Hmm.
bit with him, you know, coaching slash encouraging. And basically, what Scott said was, you're on this path alone, and there's this entire organization that's on practically the same path. You're running parallel with them, and if I could just nudge you
Hmm.
over to where your paths would converge, you would have all of this support. And yeah, and that was exactly what happened. And then one thing led to another, and I met Steve, and and, Steve was just incredibly encouraging. He told me, if you do this, this is the first permanent building model in the last 100 years.
Hmm.
And he was really excited about what I was doing. And yeah.
And then you ended up in Oklahoma at Carlton Landing on Lake Eufaula. How did that come to be?
Well, the developer Grant Humphreys, I was starting to share a lot of what I was doing on social media, and doing some blogging, and just really trying to talk about what I was doing and get feedback about it. And because, again, this is we're in a lab. This is building science for us. We're trying to figure out the best way to do something that hasn't been done before. And um, and we started to generate, some a stir in the in the new urbanist circles, and Grant Humphreys came across us and invited me out to Carlton Landing to come take a look. And one thing led to another, and here we are. We've been here for 9 years
Hmm.
next month.
Wow, it's hard to believe 9 years already. Wow.
Yeah, it's yeah.
And how many homes have you built at Carlton Landing?
Well, we were still building only one a year at that time. So during our discovery process, which was about 5 years, we built one house a year. Then in 2017, we began to scale, and we were building um, like we were doing like three houses a year at that
Hmm.
point. And now it's and with some apprentices who are now journeymen and out on their own. Uh, it's we still haven't maximized our scaling capacity, but we're getting there. Yeah.
So in those initial years when you were building one house a year, like how big's your company? How many people are working with you?
Well, there would be a couple of apprentices, and then the subcontractors.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And now?
It varies. We just finished a class of four young apprentices, and right now we have one, and we're looking at several. You
Okay.
know,
All right. So I know that's been a big part also of what you've been doing, has really been trying to train people and build up this apprenticeship program. Why don't you talk a little bit about how that works, and if somebody happens to be listening that's interested, what all's involved with being an apprentice to learn how to do this kind of work?
sure, yeah, they just have to reach out, and we go through an application process, and it's not as structured as it sounds. It's really just a deep immersion, which means you just get in there and start working, and we tell you how to do it and show you how to do it, and you do it a lot until you know it
Hmm.
very well. And that's the process of teaching.
How long does it take before somebody feels like they know it, or you feel like they know it really well?
It really depends on the apprentice.
Yeah.
It depends on the person that's coming to us. Some people come to us are already very skilled, say in carpentry, and obviously they're just used to using their hands and will get there quicker.
Yeah.
Um, but um, but I'll give you an example. Like one year we had a contingent of 10 Notre Dame architecture students come out, and they built one of our borough cottages from first brick to last in 14 days. And that was five guys and five girls. I made it a point to never lay a brick myself. I wanted this to be done strictly by the interns and the apprentices. And I think that that's just so incredibly telling.
Yeah.
That's a real success story there, because 10 students that had never laid a brick, and they're building a whole house in 14 days.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So then
It's a,
how
we call it artist cottages. It's a little 800 square foot cottage.
right.
But they're super cool little houses.
Yeah, and these are the ones that are arranged around a little courtyard at
Hmm.
Carlson Landing. Yeah, it's
Hmm.
probably if you've seen it, it's like the most postcard worthy shot of just about any place you've seen with new construction. It's pretty
Yeah,
incredible.
it's called the Borough Pocket Neighborhood, and it uh, year before last it got a charter award.
Yeah, yeah. So, how many of your apprentices then have gone on to kind of start doing their own thing?
There are 5 that are fairly prolific right now.
Yeah. So you've got,
We
I
have
think,
we have a couple in Pennsylvania. We have one
oh,
in Oklahoma City. One in South Carolina.
okay.
Austin Tennell with building culture. He's probably our most prolific, kind of a flagship apprentice
And
journeyman.
Austin's in Oklahoma City.
Hmm.
Yeah. All of these former apprentices then are off kind of building either one or several houses a year with this
Right,
method. Yeah,
right.
that's pretty fantastic. I mean, that's got to be a good feeling.
It is, and they're teaching people how to do it as well. So I have these grandchildren. Lot.
So when obviously one of the most common questions that you get is like, Clay, these houses are gorgeous, we love them, but this can't possibly scale, in the world of modern construction and, in a fast growing world where we've got to build, X number of houses a year to house people and apartments and everything else. I mean, so what do you say to the whole notion of scaling when you think about this type of construction?
Well, the only reason that the conventional construction we have now scales is because there's such an infrastructure to build that way, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of support for building that way, and we're doing it without any of that infrastructure. We're doing it without any of that support. So, the more people we have building this way, the more buildings that we are creating building this way, uh, the more familiar we make people uh, become with this still being done.
Mhm.
We just increase the awareness that it's possible, and we also uh, are creating an appetite for it, right?
Right.
So I think that it just takes time, and it can happen. It can definitely scale. It just requires more people, and we're working on that.
So I know from working, in the development world that, we're kind of all trained to think about things as like price per square foot. I'm going to do this construction approach or this design approach, and it's going to cost, $10 a square foot. This one's going to cost 40 a square foot, whatever it might be. And how do you address that conversation when you talk about this type of construction versus the typical stick frame construction?
Well, I try to embrace it. That you can't have sustainability without profitability. There's no getting around that. But at the same time, we can still reserve portions of our soul to appreciate and promote other avenues, and
Mhm.
that can be complementary. You know, um, it's this the square foot uh, price point. Here in Carlton Landing, one of the things that we've been able to achieve is that the appraisers are acknowledging what we're doing, the value of what we're doing, which is a big step to have.
Mhm.
That's never happened before.
Hmm.
In the past, it's only been a square foot value, you know, and the square foot value of this house is going to be the same as the square foot value of that house. But here, they are seeing that as a significant upgrade.
Yeah. Yeah. So at least on the sales side, you're seeing that there's some additional value that because of the uniqueness and the beauty of the buildings.
Yeah, and the lack of maintenance,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
is a big deal here because a lot of these are second homes for people and they're not here and they rent them out and they're not here to maintain them. So they need to be able to withstand visitors who might
yeah.
not take that good care of the property, and they have to withstand the elements which are very much up and down here.
Right. So on the just like the boring but interesting to me logistics side, talk a little bit about how you handle things like HVAC and electrical components with a structural masonry building.
Well, we don't put anything in the wall. So as far as like switch legs and things of that nature, we just have exposed conduit on the walls and try to minimize it, but
Hmm.
or do it in a tasteful way, or um, but we kind of refer to that as a residential type vibe for
Uh-huh.
building. Uh, in terms of the other mechanicals, a lot of times we will use open web trusses for the floor system,
Hmm.
and that so the entire floors are chases for mechanicals. So it doesn't really affect anything. Um,
Interesting.
if you get down anytime soon, you can see some of these mechanicals
Yeah.
in the house we're building now. So
Yeah. I keep telling you I plan to, and I do plan to, but it'll be one of these days. Got to work it around family schedules, which
sure, sure.
I'm sure you can
Yeah,
appreciate.
bring them all down for a weekend. It's a good place to hang out.
Yeah, I'm sure it is, and I'm definitely eager to try to see how quickly I'm able to learn uh, as uh, as an older guy now, trying to put some to lay some brick and see if it's something I can pick up in a day or so.
You'll be surprised.
So, I mean, what is the? I mean, you must have an interesting just a reaction to all these because this. I mean, this is really the ultimate like low tech, method to construction. Something that our ancestors have done for literally for thousands of years.
Since
What do you
history
think about?
began.
Yeah, what do you think about when you see like the latest and greatest like Silicon Valley approach to solving the construction dilemma?
Uh, I just think that when we're operating from a value system that that calls success getting as much as you can while contributing the least amount possible, I just think that's a path to nowhere. I don't think that we can hope for anything good coming from that. And it's the difference between earning and gaming. Do you know what I mean by
Yeah,
that?
yeah, absolutely.
Like, I don't think it's possible to earn $1 billion. Uh, That's just not, earning implies an exchange. I've got something valuable. You've got something valuable. We'll trade these things, and now we'll both have both of these things. But when you're kind of gambling, a lot of people make their living almost in a gambling mentality, where you're just kind of rolling the dice and hoping for the best, and you can game a situation. You can find all the ways to complicate the rules and come out on top. And
Yeah,
that's just not the way that I've chosen to live.
yeah. And this is I don't want to say this is off topic, but it's not really off topic, but it just kind of interests me. But we have this we have a world now where we talk an awful lot about how there's a lot of young men, especially, who struggle to find something to do that's meaningful for them. And here you have this world that you're kind of training folks and building something that is beautiful, but also done in a way that actually requires a lot of labor. And it's fascinating to me that we're always like thinking about like the next high tech solution to that when we have this void of we do need buildings built to house people, and we have a whole bunch of people who seem to need something to do. that adds value and meaning to their life. Uh, I mean, I don't want to get too spiritual about this with you, but I wonder how you might think about that.
Yeah, right now you can drive out and to a town somewhere in the middle of the day, and there's just all this traffic everywhere, and I just find myself, why are these people working? What what are they doing? It's the middle of the week, middle of the day, and why is there even traffic? Of course, I'm out there. I'm on the way to I'm on the way to the lumber yard or something. Um, but yeah, Kevin, I mean, we are designed to push against something. You know that it grounds us. That coordinate of pushing against something. We are made to do that, and we're made to deal with a resistance. You know,
Yeah,
and when you remove that, I think you're kind of losing your anchor. You know, and you can kind of see it throughout the world right now, uh, because that we've just evolved that way. We've
yeah,
evolved to deal with struggle and take all struggle out of our lives, and we don't know how to cope with that.
right.
And I think that we're seeing a lot of that right now. Um, uh, one of the things that concern me most in terms of all the conflict in our country right now is how little people seem to realize the value of safety. That you can go out to eat with your family and not have a moment's thought about whether or not you're safe, not worry about whether or not your car is going to be broken into.
Hmm.
All of that, all of that was purchased with a very heavy price. People died for us to be able to experience this degree of safety,
Yeah,
and we've taken it so much for granted that we just don't appreciate its value anymore.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
I got off on the
That's okay. That's okay.
lack
I
of segue there.
I took you out a different direction anyway, so it's the
Yeah,
way it goes.
but yeah, trying to bring it back, loop it back in. Yeah, I think young people are looking for purpose and meaning, and that if you don't have that resistance in your life, if you don't have that thing that you push against, you don't you know that you're not doing anything. You know that you're not um, satisfying a need, and that's inherent and intrinsic to your absolute being, that goes way into your genes,
Yeah,
many generations back, and it's arrived at you, and you're not doing anything with it. And I think people feel that.
yeah, and like you've got one of your apprentices now. I don't even know if he's still an apprentice or not, but that is basically like former military, and it, yeah,
Yeah, Rob Fox, who is
yeah,
working with us right now, he's an incredible man. He's and he was a Marine, did a couple of tours in Afghanistan, and ran logistics. And so he's bringing, that's a good pairing, because I'm lean more towards the artist side of creating, and when
mhm,
you need to scale that in a practical, predictable way, right? You need someone who really understands logistics, and he's doing a lot in that regard.
yeah. And I guess I can't help but wonder, like somebody, especially like that, who if you're joining the Marines, you probably have a very high sense of mission and service and purpose that you're pursuing, and doing this kind of work also, it's very different, but it can give you that sense of mission and purpose in your day-to-day life.
Absolutely.
We've done about an hour, so we should probably go ahead and start to wrap it. Clay, I do want to ask one final question that I ask all my guests. I call this the Messy City podcast, which is kind of an ode to places that are not so pure and pristine and perfect in everything that they do, and neighborhoods or cities itself. I wonder if I use that terminology, what comes to mind for you? What's a place that you think about?
Well, we were talking earlier about a lack of language. A good example of that is the Japanese have a word called wabi sabi, and it refers to the right amount of imperfection,
Yeah,
right? And there's a problem with counterfeit. Counterfeit can't afford to be imperfect. It can't draw a closer look, right? It wants you to look at it and keep going. And that's what you see right now when you look at sprawl. You see this manufactured kind of pristineness that is so entirely void of meaning and life. Uh, so it's lacking that right amount of messy,
Hmm.
right? And when you're um, just so unapologetically, when you allow the material to just be so unapologetically what it is, you and I think you satisfy that need for that organic imperfection.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. I, that's I really like that. So, Clay, I know I follow you on social media, as do many of our friends. What's the best way for people to find you and get in touch with you, follow you, etc.?
So on Instagram and Twitter, I'm Thousand Year House, and that's the number 1,000 Year House, lowercase, no spaces. Um, and yeah, I mean, we're going to be working on some other websites and stuff like that, but that's the primary way to reach me right now.
Okay, terrific. All right, Clay, thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kevin. Take
I'll
care.
get there. I'll get down there to see you sooner than you think.
Okay, I'm holding you to it.
All right.
See ya.
So farewell, farewell, a friend. Farewell, farewell, a friend.